Yet I conquer fear and fall like a soul. I run into the heat of day, like a knife I fight until the fight is won. In the rain I save each and every one till this war is won.
Okay, so this video game was a bit of an odd trip, which is frankly why I love doing videos on handheld games. They are inevitably played by less people since the console market is always going to be more dominant of the two, and the news about them just doesn't get around like the other ones. Like, if I decide to do a video on BioShock, a whole bunch of people, including myself, are basically going to have at least a pretty good chance at knowing what I'll think of it, and also what's included in the game, which isn't the case with handheld, and I've had good luck with it in the past, and while I'd like to think there's something there that might make this worthwhile, to be honest, that's not the case. So, Donkey Kong Land, for whatever reason, well, a bunch of reasons that we'll be talking about later, was a handheld spin-off of the original game that Rareware didn't really know what to do with. Rather than this being Donkey Kong Country 1.5 or the New Year's or whatever subtitle they would use in an alternate dimension, this game is a demake of the original Donkey Kong Country. I kind of laughed at myself when I found a review of the game that basically said, hey, it's more Donkey Kong Country and that game was great, therefore this game is awesome and all the fans should play it. See, here's the thing about saying something like that. Why the hell should anyone want to pick up Donkey Kong Land on the idea that it's just more DKC when they already have DKC? First of all, that would cost money for a completely different system, and you didn't say anything about the game doing anything new with the idea or the new platform, having unique levels to get at, some better story, or really anything that it offers. Well, it's a Game Boy game, so story isn't going to be available regardless, but you just said that it was like the original, which isn't really a good argument for a thing's quality. Like I said, Donkey Kong Land isn't like the Wario Land games that were different from console entries from its franchise and each other, and is essentially just a demake of the original game with technically new levels and enemies, which isn't exactly a point in its favor when Donkey Kong enemies have no ability to stop the player and are killed pretty damn fast. Even the bosses comparatively are so easygoing, and you really can't trade on the value of new levels when the same types of levels are still being produced. Jungles, caves, the swamp, and the new types of levels like the snowy mountains and going into a city doesn't really liven up the experience because of the technical limitations. I mean, this isn't Super Mario Odyssey. We're not getting a wholly new experience just because we're going into a modern setting. Now, I'm not even going to attempt to try and think of how they did it, but I will give substantial credit to Rareware. Being able to render those 3D sprites they did on the SNES with slightly less fidelity on the Game Boy was legitimately an impressive feat. The game is a demake of DKC, which means that you get the same art style as the SNES original. It's just in black and white, which is actually pretty damn cool. It's just that the game suffers for being on a platform it was not designed to be on originally. The game has a horsepower problem from being on the Game Boy, but it isn't horrible to play. It just adds a few tripping stones along the way that has everything to do with this game being on the Game Boy. The screen is smaller, so I started taking my time more since you can't see that far ahead of you, and avoid the classic Rareware death traps. The game's engine runs a bit slower, as with character movement. The hitboxes of the characters are kinda odd, allowing you to clip more into walls and floors, and the camera is a lot stiffer to use, and it doesn't move naturally with progression. Simply turning around can have it flip to the entire other side of the character, even when that isn't actually being helpful. And that's not to mention the other demake losses of transferring this onto the handheld, such as the loss of items, helper buddies, some actual mechanics, and level gimmicks, and simple level total from putting this on the Game Boy, which is why it's so baffling to me that Donkey Kong Land exists at all. It doesn't feel like a game that Rareware made willingly. It feels more like a business move from Nintendo to push the Game Boy. Hey, do you remember that SNES game that was a smash hit, one of the best you've ever seen? How about we make it again and make it handheld? And I guess Nintendo also threatened to burn down the Rareware building if they didn't do it. I could be totally wrong about that, maybe this was a passion project from somebody, yet I'm getting the same vibe from this that I did from Sticker Star, like how the game they made doesn't fit their catalog of products, and it feels weird that they're associated with it at all. I guess if you want a more contemporary comparison, I could just say Anthem, but that might get the video dislike bomb just for mentioning how bad that game is. And I'm surprised they ever thought that, considering I wrote this script about 6 months ago. I knew that Donkey Kong Land was going to be hard to talk about, because the bottom line is that this is handheld Donkey Kong Country with a bunch of bits ripped out of it with very little to fill in that gap. But I do think that getting this onto the handheld was objectively a good idea, since people always love to have games on the go, and really at the time, this was the most modern way to make that happen. But I keep getting hung up on the caveat. The game doesn't add anything to its franchise or to the game that it's being a demake of. It's just there being a thing that exists to make money and be a short time sink with typical gameplay and not a lot of the creativity of the SNES original. I can accept that the game is like this because of the times, but that doesn't really explain why this was made beyond being a good profit winner. I guess I could say that the soundtrack was pretty good for what they were going for, and the level design is also pretty technically stylish. Like I said earlier, the game is just black and white Donkey Kong Country, so not a lot of the artistic talent was actually lost in translation. However, being 8-bit can make some parts of the game look like brick walls, but it's all serviceable to the people who clamored for a Game Boy DKC. I suppose if you were seriously dying from Donkey Kong hunger, then I could recommend this game to the super fans, but the game itself is literally an inferior brother of Donkey Kong Country with nothing unique to itself to make the game something to look out for on its own. It has no unique selling point other than being handheld, and those games usually get away with their lacking horsepower of the consoles by being off-the-wall nuts or having some spin-off sort of gameplay that only it can offer. Thankfully, a couple games later on will prove that the DK has some handheld game potential, but all that Donkey Kong Land can do is push the envelope backwards, and all it does is sit on its monkey bum waiting for the audience to get bored. Like at the time, if this game was released right after Donkey Kong Country, the intended audience for this game would have immediately dropped it for eternity right after DKC 2 hit shelves, because why would they need the demake when they have the sequel? So the game in of itself isn't meant to last all that long as an experience, and it really doesn't. When I was writing this script 6 months ago, I remembered almost nothing that this game did other than it was black and white, and you fight Captain K. Rool at the end just like the original game, with the same items, the same Diddy Kong, the other bosses, enemies, and blah blah blah. The fairest thing I could say is that, like with other mediocre Nintendo platformers, the game's competently made, the gameplay works, and the difficulty is more fair than the console version, so at least it's not a total waste of money, but I'm gonna say that it's a waste of time, except for the ultra-devoted fans. If you have a need to satisfy the curiosity, I'd say only go up to like $3 or $4 to get a digital copy, otherwise emulate the damn thing if Nintendo's not selling it, because this thing sure as hell ain't worth $10, believe me. Anyway, thank you for watching the video. We're gonna put up a scoreboard for DKL. And leave you guys with a victory for gamers. See you next time.